Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly Q&A / just whatever we want it to be, video / podcast. Links in the description if you're on YouTube, which you probably are, to access this on all, I shouldn't say all, a lot of major podcasting platforms, kind of whatever.
Well, I don't know what's happened when Spotify ended up buying Anchor and stuff. Like, it feels like there's at least some sort of consolidation in the industry.
Yeah. And one thing that I know is that while it was still Anchor, they sort of changed around which stuff it would be uploaded to. They specifically made it work on less platforms.
Yeah.
But then they said if you already have it set up, right, you will have to do it manually if you want it on these platforms. But if we already set it up for you, when you first signed up, it'll keep cross-posting.
Right.
So have we actually, we might need to check. Nobody's given us feedback that it's not available on them.
I think the number of people who are actually paying attention is probably small enough.
And importantly, the RSS feed link lets you add it manually to whatever platform you want. I recently actually, for another podcast, added something manually via RSS feed that was being done through Spotify podcasts. And I only realized because the URL is still anchor.fm for the podcast distribution. Interesting. Anyways, sort of one thing that we wanted to talk about, which is we might have mentioned in passing, maybe not, but we've started watching, or we had started watching, we've now finished watching the spin-off to The Boys, Generation V.
Yeah.
And it was really good.
It was.
It's a great show. I was surprised at how compelling and good it was. You hope it's good because it's from a universe that you care about.
Right.
But I'm not going to pretend like The Boys is some sort of blockbuster IP that like I knew they would only do right by, right?
Right.
So I, figured it could be almost anything, and it's funny because it was filmed at U of T, and for people who know, we're in like the Greater Toronto area. So The Boys was filmed in Toronto. The spin-off show was filmed in the Greater Toronto area as well. It was on the like Mississauga campus of U of T, and so it's kind of cool for a good show to come out. That feels like it's sort of made here, right? It has a little bit of the DNA of the city, even though they're always pretending it's someplace else, right? But yeah, the show is really, really good.
Yeah. It has a lot of sort of over-the-top kind of sex and violence. But I feel like as a show, it had something really interesting to say about the kind of the way power works and what it's interesting, right? Because it's not just the interesting stories to me sometimes are there's always stories that are possible about the big characters, the important characters, the people are in the headlines that are responsible for sort of the bigger shifts in history. And it's interesting to me when you can tell a story in that world about the people who are affected by that. It's not even necessarily that there's actually, in the Generation V, there's lots of stuff happening in history, but these are just the smaller people and the implications of this world that you've introduced that has all these elements, right? The superheroes, Compound V, all that kind of stuff, and what it means to the other parts of the world that we might recognize, right? Because it doesn't all just go away. You don't just dump it and it's only, in the old days, comic books were really just superhero stories and nothing else. And I feel like there's a huge shift with the Marvel comics, especially Spider-Man, where you actually got more of the story of the non-superheroing moments of his life. And in some ways they were much more important. And it seemed like, I think that was a big change in, comic book storytelling.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I'm interested in is because we've sort of seen a lot of comic book stuff turn into series and spin-offs that increasingly become tied together. And with Generation V, there is just enough interactions with sort of main plot kind of stuff that could or that might or might not come back in The Boys. But some of it, I'm not going to spoil anything, some of it I imagine will. Although it's hard to say for sure. I kind of want to know if and this is something we'll only be able to figure out in retrospect, if this is going to be like a true spin-off series, or if it's going to be kind of like the way a lot of Marvel stuff works, where this is like The Boys season like 3.5, where important stuff happens that you need to watch this to really fully appreciate the future seasons of The Boys. Comics
always had those kind of, what do you call them? Those events, those crossover events. Yeah. So it wouldn't be some new precedence.
Yeah. But I think that was one of the things, and the good news is with The Boys, at least, that it's a lot less stuff, right? There's only the 2 shows for it right now, so it's not like Marvel where you need to watch a bunch of movies and then you need to watch shows. Like, I know one of the big criticisms that people had with like The Mandalorian was that Book of Boba Fett was like resolving Mandalorian plot lines in like certain episodes of it. Even though the show is mostly not involving the same characters. So you had to watch this whole other show, or you need to like look up a guide on which episodes of Book of Boba Fett you need to watch as part of your like experience of The Mandalorian, and it just becomes so sort of like tiring.
So it's an interesting word you chose to use earlier, saying spin-off, because I don't know that they've actually said it's a spin-off, right? The reason why I say that, because I come from a background of watching a lot more, network TV.
Yeah.
And back in the day, when there were spin-offs, some of them were real legitimate spin-offs, right? Like Three's Company was very popular. The spin-off was Three's a Crowd. So, Jack got married or something, and he was no longer living in the situation with the 2 women, pretending to be gay for the landlord not to give him grief. Mm-hmm. And then you have other spin-offs, like Mork and Mindy was a spin-off of Happy Days, but in no meaningful way was it. It was that they wanted to launch this new show, so they had Mork and Mindy.
One episode of Happy Days?
One episode, they showed up in Happy Days, and then they got their own show. Yeah. Like, it was that kind of... So, it's interesting to me. What was it?
So, Wikipedia calls it a spin-off.
Right, but did they market it as that? Like, this is a judgment people make.
I don't know.
Right?
I think they just marketed it as like part of The Boys universe,
Yeah, but I think that's totally fair. And what it's doing for me is it's telling a different kind of story in the universe, and of course it's going to cross over. Like, it reminds me a little bit of...
Yeah, they say from the world of The Boys comes Gen V.
Right.
Yeah.
See, and that seems more fair. I think when people say that's a spin-off, they're putting something there they're bringing their own sort of judgment and opinion and inserting themselves in deciding what it is, when it's not really intended to spin off. I feel like it's a parallel story. Like, so there's a comic book called Marvels that was written by Kurt Busiek and drawn by Alex Ross. So Alex Ross does those painted covers. He's really famous for doing like the realistic superhero shots that are really majestic, right? Like they're, you might recognize it. I think you would recognize it. He did a TV guide cover when they were doing Superboy, the TV show back with, I don't know how many years ago. Anyways, that doesn't matter. The idea, though, was Marvels was a story about the ordinary people that saw what happened. Like, they were involved, they'd recount stuff that happened in the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
But from the perspective of the normal people that were affected. And Generation V isn't normal people, right? But to me, it feels like that. It's not meant, Marvel's was not in any meaningful way really a spin-off so much as it was, it's a retelling. It's like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, or those kind of stories where you're fleshing it out because you're, like the way Mists of Avalon was a story of Arthur, but told from a different perspective.
Yeah, you're making a lot of references that I don't know.
Okay, so it's just, there's a long history of that where...
You're like, there's other examples, like these things that you've never heard of. And I'm like, yeah, those probably are... I don't think you're lying to me right now, but it doesn't mean anything.
Well, hopefully it connects with somebody, but it's the idea... I think it's kind of neat. It's really... They're fleshing it out by giving more depth to the story that they've already told.
Yeah. I think it's really good. I think it's like a natural extension of it. I think it does some stuff different, but it's telling a really interesting story. I think it's hard to imagine someone really liking The Boys and not liking Generation V.
Right.
To me, at least. I'm sure there are people who do, but the reasons somebody would like one and not the other are unclear to me.
Right.
You know?
But it's like you were telling me, what was it that you were telling me, that there was somebody who really... Oh, you were telling me that somebody who liked the Star Wars universe really did not like Andor. You were telling me was it during... We did this during one of the podcasts, right?
Yeah, it was... Well, I think we talked about it outside of the podcast. I don't know if we brought it up in it, but there was somebody... was like a movie or like a media content creator. And there was a clip of him that went around of him basically saying, and I'm going to butcher it, like these aren't the exact words. So you can find the clip of like, it was going around on Twitter where he was like, oh yeah, Andor was really good and whatever. Like, I know it's like well done, like super well written, whatever. But like I found it like really boring and I almost like fell asleep. It's like, you're like a film student or whatever, but personally I it was so slow and I like could barely like get through an episode without like falling asleep. And so like the way that he said it was good, kind of dismissively, almost like, yeah, of course it's good, everybody says it's good, but I actually, and then goes into talking about like what really sounds like a show that he did not enjoy watching at all. And yeah, it was really interesting because it was just, I think that sort of the tension between going along with the popular opinion for it,
right,
and then clearly having like a different sort of view of it, where he was talking about it really derisively, like it was like pretentious, right?
And I didn't watch that original video, but the way you're describing it too makes me think that the guy missed the point. Like I actually found that was the best Star Wars thing I'd ever seen, because of just how rich everything was. Not rich in a way where you just throw a bunch of aliens, so there's a lot of stuff going on, but just wow, aliens instead. It was that there was...
Yeah, and that guy would call you pretentious.
And this is... I know nothing about film. Yeah. I just know that it was meaningful, and when I saw it the second time around, it was even better. Mm-hmm. I said this last time, but there was that scene with Marva where I was just actually tearing up a bit, and it didn't play that way for me the first time. Anyways,
there's a lot of good
So
TV.
so getting back to the point though, I think that you're right. I think there's a huge amount of overlap between the people who would enjoy The Boys and Generation V,
which makes sense because it's in the same universe. It's got a lot of the same sort of sensibilities. It's got some shared. It's got a lot of shared DNA.
Right,
which you would have to have.
I think so. To me, The Boys has very much a coming of age story for Huey. Right? I mean, he's grown already. Yeah. But there's a level of maturity that he achieves at the end that he didn't start with. And in that way, it feels like a coming-of-age kind of story.
I wouldn't have thought of it that way at all.
But see, that's why I think Generation V has that huge amount of overlap, because Generation V is very much another coming-of-age story. It's like young adults. It focuses on... I mean, young adult YA... fiction. Yeah. A lot of it is defined by the protagonist, right? Yeah. It's not necessarily, you can have protagonists that are young adults, that not in a YA story, but often it is. And I think, Generation V is, you're already there. You're in university. Yeah. They're figuring themselves out. They're finding their way. And they have a character who literally is even more emphatically trying to figure her way in a world that she doesn't understand.
Yeah. I would say it's definitely worth a watch.
Highly recommend
if you are willing to, if you're willing to deal with sort of intense graphic subject matter. Yeah. And especially if you've already watched The Boys. I would watch The Boys first, probably still. Yeah. I can't see a huge reason to jump straight into Generation V unless you really didn't like The Boys but wanted to like it. But if the thing that turned you away was sort of the violence or the sort of mature content, it is hard. It would be too much again. Yeah, it probably wouldn't be that much better for you. Yeah. So anyways, getting into maybe
the video. All right. So I want to point out a couple of things. So this is always interesting. What I really like about how I've been doing Injustice lately, where we have the recap where we talk about the challenge character. We played for a little bit, give you some tips and talk about some of the interesting spots. And then we continue to play a little bit. So we have footage for the Q&A right after. Yeah. And it's funny how you think you've got a real handle on it. And there's always just a little interesting point. So Suicide Squad Deadshot was the main character. If the footage is right, here's a poll. If you're listening to this, let me know. If we've got full footage, like full ultimates, do you want us to just end the footage as close to when we end talking? Like just let you finish watching the fight? Or do you want to finish the ultimate? Let us know in the comments. we're happy to oblige. The footage is already there, but I've always trimmed it just so that it's not like dead air and just video.
Well, because in one way, it's almost kind of arbitrary where the ultimate ends, right? Like,
Sure.
the extra fights aren't different. There's not like a narrative arc or closure you get from watching the last fight.
But they're supposed to get harder.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's a level of progression, right? So it's always interesting to watch a team. It's always interesting to see the situations. But, all right, so Suicide Squad Deadshot. What's neat is, there's certain situations with any character that if you play them enough, because they don't show up that often, you discover them almost. And you learn stuff. So Suicide Squad Deadshot has the thing. His special one really pushes characters back. And you notice that if you block after you get landed unblocked. If you block yourself after you land an unblocked special one.
Yeah, because you're not sort of both jumping towards each other to meet in the middle.
But he's got such a short latency period, or refractor period. Sorry, it's such a short refractor period. So after he finishes special one, he can do special one right away. That if he does that, and he starts his special one before the opponent gets up from being knocked out, it doesn't do any damage. So when I first saw it, the first few times I saw that, I thought maybe his gunshot wasn't ranged enough. But it is. It's because they were still down. But with the Claw of Horus, you can still shatter their gear when it doesn't hit, and you get your power back. And so you can do that a few times. It's just interesting. Like, it's just that there's little nuances to a character that you discover when you end up putting in the time. Mm-hmm. Anyways, I thought that was neat. And you might even notice, whoever's watching, if you notice anything else, I'd love to hear what your comments are about Suicide Squad Deadshot.
So there we go. Moving on to our first question of the week. This one comes from one of two things. It's either Daniel, or actually more than two things, but I can read this two ways. We were going through it and I was practicing pronunciation. I think it's either Daniel Klimek, or it's, as you pointed out, Daniel K. Lime K.
Yeah, I think it's more like a Klimek.
4867.
But I saw the lime in there.
Yeah, hard to say. As always, you can let us know if we're pronouncing it right and correct us for next time if you're commenting again. This is a very long comment, so we're only going to read chunks. They literally at one point say, if you're still reading, and then at the end say, like, sorry for the essay of a comment, but it's also because we talked about a team that they have been sort of theory crafting and working on for a while, so they have some, like, interesting feedback worthwhile to consider. So we probably won't read the whole thing, because it would be, like, a couple minutes of just reading out this person's comment, and you're here for our response in addition to the comment.
Right.
So Daniel says, there were some interesting points about the Flashpoint team, and while I do agree that Flashpoint Deathstroke and Flashpoint Aquaman are criminally underrated, I don't think that Deathstroke is the star in a full Flashpoint team. He does have a powerful combo ender, which synergizes very well with Gauntlets of Azrael, Super Pills, etc. However, I find that it tends to be somewhat unreliable. For instance, in the current online meta, knocking out an enemy with a basic attack puts you at risk of being hit with Master's Death Cart, Tantu Totem, or both, and with Deathstroke's combo ender taking 3 to 5 business days to finish, you're very likely to be hit with a special as soon as the opponent tags in. And then this same principle applies to enemies with Astro Harness.
I'm going to disagree with that. Like, I just think the reason why, that's the secondary effect, right? The reason why Flashpoint Deathstroke is, I think, the best Flashpoint character on a Flashpoint team is that he is the best for doing a special. Like, his special one is the most powerful of all three. He gets the benefit of extra hits on his special one because of it, because the pirate crew come in to help. Yeah. It's a secondary benefit that his tap combo ender has so many extra hits. And I'm going to put it to you that it's never worse to have more hits, to do more damage. So if, the worst extreme of this is regular Doomsday. What does he do? He does 2 hits on his swipe combo. That's no good. It just doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, it's just being able to keep the enemy off balance is amazing. So if the worst case, if you're ever relying on your basic damage dealer,
yeah,
I want him to finish character. I want him to be strong enough to be able to finish them. And if you can start a combo on the person that you started on, they cannot block because you're finishing your combo because it's sequence, right?
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything bad in that. You want to knock them out. What's the alternative? You don't knock them out? Somebody else knocks them out? You know what I mean? Like, so at some point, if we're never going to, in the current meta with Tantu Totem, we're never relying on the basic damage dealer. Right?
Yeah.
So if he's ever called into if you ever require him to be the basic damage dealer, the fact that he's able to get in a combo without the enemy being able to interrupt.
Yeah.
How is that a bad thing? And that's a secondary ability. His first primary ability is that his special one does so much damage that he can basically knock anybody out who doesn't have Astro Harness. I mean, in multiplayer. Mm-hmm. Right? So let me just see what else. Which other Flashpoint character is a better basic damage dealer? Not Batman. Batman doesn't do as many hits. Not Aquaman. Again, I think it's the point.
And actually, if you want to maybe respond to what Daniel's saying, because Daniel does specifically say who they think is the best.
Right.
Which is...
I wanted... The next part is... I hadn't actually thought of it. I think it's actually more interesting part of it.
So we'll say, in Survivor, he performs a bit better on average. The mass team healing from his combo blender is great to utilize, unless you want to go higher than round 12. After a while, the healing suppression modifier just completely cripples all of your healing, and the only way to heal is through the boost between fights.
Yeah, I'm not even... If it's not a Phantom Zone requirement, I'm not interested in healing anyways. I want him to have more output. You give him Gauntlets of Azrael, if you need to heal, you're in trouble already. I think damage output... Faster damage output is always... I mean, if you watch your teams, that's really mostly it.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting point, though, that I hadn't thought of, that there's going to be different considerations for which one of them is going to be best in multiplayer versus Survivor. And I think it's interesting because... Well, anyways, we can get to the point. That I think there's a better point later on, too.
Yeah, and the problem with us, I guess, is that we don't value Survivor very highly. Right? You kind of just want to get through it fast. Like, getting into those higher levels doesn't really feel like there's much additional value.
Right.
It's like bragging rights more than it is like utility of actual, like, your time.
Right. Return on investment. It's a investment concept where how much are you getting back for what you're putting in?
Yeah.
And the amount of time that you have to put in at the beginning. Like, clearly augmentations are super valuable. And if you were not able to play as much Survivor as you wanted, if you ran out of Survivor opportunities each day, then I'd say, okay, so maybe that's fair that you want to go further. But you're right, it's not a good use of your time to try to finish Survivor, because those last few fights just take a long time, and you can really motor through, I think, the first... I want to say 9 or 10 fights, like relatively quickly, and then it slows down a bit, and you just finish it off, get your last lap tickets, and then you're good to go. At this point, I think we've got as many augmentations as we need, so I'm not even really that interested in Survivor anymore. Right now, I'm just putting in a lot of time, a lot of mileage on multiplayer.
Yeah, it's true. The rewards don't really mean anything anymore. I'll keep reading maybe a little more of the comment. IMO, so in my opinion, it's Aquaman that's the star and Batman that's the top tier plan B. In online mode, gearing Flashpoint Aquaman with Master's Deathguard, Tantu Totem, and Claw of Horus, like you do with pretty much all your specialist, allows him to shatter gear when he needs to, or fire off a special 2 that, brackets with Batman's crits and some crit chance augments, will almost certainly knock out the current tagged in enemy.
Yeah, and so there's different approaches. I think Flashpoint Team, it gives you flexibility to do a lot. I'm actually of the mind that on the Flashpoint team, at least, with Deathstroke as your basic or your specialist, third gear doesn't need to be, and it can be, it doesn't need to be Claw of Horus. The only time Claw of Horus really, really matters is when the enemy has Astro Harness.
Yeah.
Right? And if Astro Harness is not in first slot, then Deathstroke approach, where we give him League of Assassins knives and do splash damage, often enough splash damage to really significantly reduce the health of the enemy.
Yeah.
Astro Harness isn't that big a deal anymore. And if Astro Harness is in first slot, you could spend the time... you could save some time with Claw of Horus. But you're also doing that at the cost of damage output. So in the cases where there's no Astro Harness, you're killing a bit of time by reducing your damage output, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there's a bit of a toss-up. It's a bit of a wash for me. That's not an awful approach, but I save that Claw of Horus approach typically for teams that have more trouble or who really can't bypass Astro Harness as quickly by doing a lot of splash damage. Like, there's lots of characters that have... You give them League of Assassin knives, they'll do splash damage too, but they don't do enough damage on their special one to make it worth taking up a slot with it.
Yeah.
But Deathstroke does. I'm not sure what else to say about this, but Astro Harness is really the main thing. I want to say the only thing, but it's the main thing that slows down fights. And you can either speed it by shattering gear, but then you're committing all the time. So, I mean, our approach has always been using, that's why Flashpoint Aquaman on our Flashpoint team is first slot. With with Claw of Horus and with Razagul Scimitar. So there's a 1 in 3 chance. Well, actually, technically 1 in 4, right? Because 75% chance of shattering gear. 3 gears on the team. There's a 1 in... So out of every 4 times, 3 times you shatter gear. Out of those 3 times you shatter gear, 1 in 3 chance it's going to be Astro Harness that you want to get rid of. So you get rid of Astro Harness 1 in 3 times. And then it doesn't matter. And it doesn't cost you a slot in who's the guy who's going to really handle the opponents.
Yeah. So there's a lot more stuff in the comment. We probably don't need to read the whole thing just because a lot of it is like sort of the specifics in how Daniel gears the team. Yeah. And then also how that tends to play out in sort of Survivor and online multiplayer. But I guess the sort of it's a great comment overall, right? This is somebody who clearly plays a lot with them. And I think it's a great example of how sort of differences in play style and preferences and what you value can really sort of change how you view a character.
Right. I just want to make sure too, I'm not picking on them about what they're doing, right? It's not that it's wrong, it's that I have a different position because of the way I like to play.
Yeah.
And this is the beauty. This was always amazing to me about Injustice, where there's enough variation and enough differences in the characters that they built in that they didn't have to, that lets you do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where there's different flavors of your approach to both the in-fight strategy, but also how you set up your team and what you're going to do with your team.
Yeah, because Daniel clearly has really thought this out. It's a really thoughtful response. Yeah. And this is absolutely true for Daniel, right? Yeah. For who Daniel thinks is better, and they have a good reason for believing what they do. And they've laid it out actually very clearly here, right? So there's a differences in opinion here, but, you know, they're thoughtful enough that it's hard to tell if it is just, you know, how they play or maybe a little bit of what they value sort of differently, right? It's not sort of clear from seeing and hearing both of you out, because we did read the whole comment, right? Even though we're not going to go through it here.
And we say that, but I do want to give Daniel credit for the interesting, because I haven't played Survivor in a while. Yeah. And if you know what, if you want to read through, let me just do this. So Daniel says, I do gear Flashpoint Batman with Killer Croc companion card, Batman Ninja helmet, and Giggle Soda, which used to bore the hell out of me in online, but it's grown on me now. I've only realized recently why this setup is so good for the player as opposed to the AI. With a full bar of power, you receive no damage from basics or specials, and 40% of enemy specials are reflected back at them courtesy of Flashpoint Aquaman. This is actually a lot less niche than I thought when I first started using the setup, especially in the late Survivor mode stages. Using that, not blocking any specials that came my way, and using basics when I had the chance is how I beat Survivor Fight 16. So I like that. It's interesting. If I was playing Survivor again, I'd be tempted to try that just to see, because there's lots of variations on that where you can set yourself up to take no damage.
Yeah.
And then whittle them away, whether it's I think it's Merciless, where tagging in and tagging out causes damage over time.
Yeah.
On the opponent. And there's the other variation with Aquaman with the Atlantean Hero, where you tag in and out, have an Atlantean Hero to eat some damage, but also just bleed the opponent over and over because you get a bar of power for free every time. And Aquaman's built-in damage over time on it is quite nice.
Yeah. No, that's good to point out, actually. There is some good information there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we probably have time for another question, especially because it's a quick one. This one comes from Francesco Ferraro 7052, and they say, I just restarted playing after years. What is Phantom Zone, and why is it always expired?
All right, so can I say something about the names? Is it just me, or does it feel like the last few times we pull questions, it's people's names with numbers after?
Yeah. It's hard to... I think that's one of those things where when you make an account, I think this is maybe a holdover from like Google Plus usernames, potentially, when they did that integration, because I know that a lot of times when you have like your YouTube account, unless you edit it, your default is now just your name, and you can have multiple of the same name, right? So you get a lot of sort of like people's actual names, And so I think you this might just be because you sign in, your account name is Francesco Ferraro, and then to distinguish you as a user, it just gives you different numbers after your @ automatically assigned to you. Because that, I can't remember the last time I've actually like had to interface with like a YouTube account, because they're all automatically made for you based off of your like Gmail account now, right? Or your
Right.
Google suite of products. So I don't know. It's hard to say exactly where that comes from. Anyways. So the question is, what is Phantom Zone and why is it always expired?
So the first part is easy. What is Phantom Zone? Phantom Zone is another mode where you have tasks that you need to complete.
It's like a quest board, basically.
Yeah, and you get prizes. And you can get a bunch of interesting prizes. Lots of stuff that's good. You can get some special characters, especially if you finish it and do it at the end. I don't know that the number of times you have to do stuff matters, but I think the key is that there is one resource that you cannot get anywhere except for in Phantom Zone.
Yeah, because it's not like a game mode in and of itself. It's
Right.
it's quests that you then take into sort of
Right.
the other game modes, like online multiplayer,
Right.
sort of
Right.
the single player, whatever.
So you can get the characters, you can get gears, you can get nth metal, but Valorium Alloy is only available there. Valorium Alloy, you cannot get anywhere else. It is required for fully developing your metal characters. So if you don't get Valorium Alloy, if you don't do Phantom Zone, you can't get Valorium Alloy. If you don't get Valorium Alloy, your metal characters are stuck where you can't properly develop their passive or their specials.
Yeah.
So that's the easy part. So
That's what it is. Yeah.
So the hard part is, why is it always expired? So it is not. So there's I think when it's not running, there's a finish thing across where it should be.
Or for most players, it is not always expired. For you, it seems like it is.
I guess, and it depends. Have you been playing for more than 2 weeks? And if you have, it's basically on a 2 week on, 2 week off cycle.
Yeah.
So usually there's 2 weeks of Phantom Zone, and then it ends for 2 weeks, and then it comes back.
Yeah.
And what we've found is that there are certain, let's call them events. So Phantom Zone is an event. Every new challenge character each week is an event.
Yeah.
And those two people have had this bug where it neither shows up properly unless they reset their game. And I believe the main culprit is still at some point shifting your clock while connected to the server. There's a disconnect between your device time or date and the server time or date. And so then the server stops sending you signals for events. And that's probably it. So how do you fix it? There's a bunch of things you can try. Definitely, if you clear your app data and then relog in, then that often works for people, but it doesn't work going forward unless you do it again yourself.
Yeah.
So that requires you knowing that you need to do it to have stuff show up. But it's not a bad thing typically to do it once a week anyways if your challenge isn't showing up.
Yeah. So those are our two theories. And then our advice would be to watch our weekly recaps if it's not up. And then you will be able to figure out when it's supposed to be up for you.
Right.
And then you'll actually be able to identify it as a problem instead of just like you haven't been playing for long enough to see it come back.
Right.
And then the second step is if it is a problem, then do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there we go. That'll do it for this week. To finish up, we'd like to give a huge thank you to all our lovely supporters on Patreon.
And that would be Michael Devries, Irvin Ruiz, and Hoshi127 who are supporting us on the credit level. A few other names that you're seeing are people who have supported us at some point during this pandemic or during the pandemic.
Yeah, so thank you so much for your support. Thanks so much to all of you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.